I think I recognize a phone number, and that must be Barbara, and just want to say hello to you. I think your phone is unmuted. I don't know.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay, not a problem.
I'll mute it. You probably heard the dogs barking, of course. Okay.
But
Tonight we're going to talk about food label reading. I guess your camera's not working, Charlie.
yeah, it is just going bananas. It's going to green and red and off, and then it'll go on, and it's like it's just spastic tonight, whatever. I don't know what the word is, and then it'll opt out, and I can't, it doesn't detect the camera. I don't know. So anyway, it's your night, so I'll just sit here. It's recording at least, and
Yeah.
fire away, Scott.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, anything to share before we get started? All right. Usually like to give it a few minutes for people to log on, but I'll be taking everyone to the website to show the handouts that are related to tonight. I'll keep one of them up just as I talk about what to look for on a food label.
I've got a question.
Before you get started, perhaps Alice has some update on something or another.
Ed, go ahead, Ed.
Um, so I eat groats in the morning, right, with some nut milk and fruit and some stuff. But no salt, like until like the end of the day. I'm just like completely salt free. It, how would I know if I'm not getting enough electrolytes?
Well, you don't have to worry about not getting enough salt. So as long as you get enough calories, you're going to get enough of the electrolytes and enough sodium as well. So it's just a natural mineral in plants and food. So, and then if you're eating it, of course, if you're eating anything processed, you're going to be probably getting too much salt. So we'll talk about that tonight. But if you're even eating just completely unprocessed whole plant foods, morning, noon, and night, you would still get enough sodium and electrolytes and stuff as long as you're getting enough calories to maintain your weight and activities and things like that.
Thanks.
You know, I tried cutting back on salt, kind of motivated by you guys, right? And I live in Idaho. It's pretty dry here. Like average humidity is 10 to 14%. Anyway, I started getting leg cramps at night, like cramps in my calves, cramps in my legs, which I never had before. So I went back to eating probably too much salt, but I don't know. Like I couldn't, I had no other explanation. I'm pretty active. I wasn't, I mean, yes, it's spring and summer. I'm back on my bike again, but not enough. I've never had leg cramps before. So I don't thoughts. I'm open to comments, thoughts.
I mean, leg cramps can be so, nebulous. It can be like too much activity, suddenly increasing activity, suddenly decreasing activity, not quite the right hydration. Those are the more common reasons for leg cramps than just being a little bit low in sodium or something like that. But yeah, if you're instead of drinking so much plain water, you want to do a little sports drink, no sugar added sports drink or something, you could do that. But I would kind of go more with those other reasons. Suddenly increasing activity is more likely to cause a leg cramp than just maybe dropping from a high level of sodium to what's probably considered a normal level of sodium. That's where I'd put my stock anyway. So getting good stretching before exercise and staying well hydrated, and keep working on the nutrition, and I guess that's where I'd start. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or anything? Let me share my screen.
I can see it.
Okay, so we're at livelifestylemedicine.com. So we're going to go to the resources tab here, click on that. And scroll down, you'll see handouts from classes, and we'll click on that. And then scroll down here and you'll see where we'll get to all the food label reading stuff. So we have, let's see here, right here, there's actually three of them here. How to read food labels without being tricked. This is a full like 6-page article with all kinds of tips and stuff on it. We won't go through all that tonight, but it's here as a resource. And then there's this basic how to read a food label one. So it downloads here. Summary. Pull up the PDF here if it's going to download. My computer was, so here it is, was wanting to update just as I was logging in, which is why that was a few minutes later than usual. And then let's go back to, there's that. And then, so I'm going to keep that one pulled up. And then we have, so here's how to read a food label without being tricked. This is the full article. So I'll close that one out. Let's see here. Let me go back to then new and improved nutrition facts label key changes. So this kind of has a label, and we'll do some examples of some of the things I'm going to talk about tonight from here. So this is a little bit outdated because this was back in 2018. This was when they transitioned from the old food label, which looked kind of like this on the left. Now the food labels today look like the one on the right. And so that this was 2018 was when they made a transition from the old label to the new label. But I think it's still interesting because I can go over the kind of a couple of the changes that were made and how we have to do a couple of math problems differently here to get the information that we want. So let me go back to here. So this is what we're going to be spending most of our time on. I'll go ahead and pull it up as a PDF so it's larger so you guys can see it better. And this kind of has more descriptions of things here. So this is from the University of California, Davis, their nutrition program. And I actually got these from Thomas Bosch, who's a dietitian here in town. One of the classes he taught for me back in, I think it was like 2018 on food label reading, he utilized this. So what we're going to go over is these key things on this tab here. I know it's a little bit hard to read because it's just kind of washed out and stuff, but you can come back and watch this lecture again. It's being recorded if you just want a reminder or explanation of everything we talk about tonight. So the first rule for reading a food label. So does anyone want to take a stab at kind of a trick question here? What's the number one? What do you think the number one rule is when it comes to nutrition and on reading regarding food labels, reading a food label, for example? Anyone want to take a stab at the trick question?
Sorry.
I know you're
No label at all.
Hey, who said that?
It's me, Kyle.
All right. So you got the trick question. So for the number one rule is if it has a food label, then you probably don't want to eat it for the most part. That's not 100%, but just in general, if you don't want to have to worry about all these rules, just eat whole plant foods that don't have food labels. So you're shopping in the produce section, because if you're going in the produce section at the grocery store, you're in the bulk bin section at the grocery store. So we just did a grocery store shopping tour last week with one of our dietitians, Karen Booth, and we were at the Winco in Springfield, and we pretty much were in the produce section and the bulk section the entire time. There's a couple of places we stopped along the way just to show a couple of more convenience foods, like a nut milk that's in a box that you can take for your when you're traveling or whatever. That's not in the regular dairy case, and then maybe some canned or frozen vegetables that are in the frozen section, and some certain things like that. But not otherwise. You're not really shopping in the middle aisles because that's where all the foods with the food labels are. So, but you need to have this information because it's not 100%. There's times where even if you look at a label on a bag of frozen peas, for example, it still has a food label, so you still want to pay attention, because sometimes with some of the convenience foods, it'll it'll look really healthy and be good, but then they've added either sugar to it or oil to it or salt to it. So that when that happens, then you need to know these rules to kind of have some tools of how to determine what the foods you should go ahead and purchase and the ones you maybe should put back on the shelf. So yeah, the number one rule is, hey, just try to, for the most part, let's just shop at the produce section, the bulk bins. That's where it's really cheap to eat healthy, is if you stick to those things. If you start buying processed foods that are like processed even vegan or vegetarian, then you start, it's like one, it's expensive, and two, it starts to kind of not follow these rules that we're going to talk about. So that's number one. And then number two, it's a lot of it, this is in the article and some of those other documents I showed you earlier from the website here, is you never want to believe what's on the front of the package. So if it says healthy, low fat, low salt, things like that, you really don't take much stock in what's on the front, because it's just trying to grab your attention, grab your eye. It's not really necessarily telling the truth. So you don't believe anything on the front of the label. And then the second, and I guess the third rule would be to look at the ingredients list. And if the ingredients list has only 3 or 4 things on the list, and it's foods that you recognize, it's like, oh yeah, it's just this, and this, and I know what that is. But if it starts to have all these chemical names, it looks like a chemistry set, there's 10, 20 ingredients on it, all kinds of preservatives and colorings, and just these big long names, because a lot of these big long names are longer names for things that are sugar, things that are salt, things that are preservatives, and things like that. So if it looks like a chemistry set, like not like something you could create in your own kitchen, that's another red flag. That's something you probably don't want to eat. It's not going to be the most health promoting food. So those are the main things before we even get to these tabs here, which we're going to talk about. So any questions about those things so far? Some of that's the basics that people kind of have some idea about, but some of these other rules maybe are not quite as intuitive. So let's go ahead and start here then. So fat, less than 20% of calories per serving. So when you think of fat, a lot of times, and that's where the what's on the front of the label, the front of the product, can be misleading, because it'll say, you might see like beef or chicken or things in the store that say 97% fat free, and you're going, okay, that means it's only 3% fat. It's 97% fat free, but that's actually incorrect, because it's basically what they do is they do percent of fat by weight, not by calories. So percent of fat by calorie is much more effective. It's much more telling of what actually how much fat you're actually eating. So what they do is they just put in, like chicken, for example, they inject salt water into it, and it increases the weight and things like that. And so they can do it by weight, and so then it sounds like it's actually lower in fat than it actually is. So that's another kind of example of that. So when we look at fat, we want percent of fat percent of calories that are coming from fat. And so less than 20% is usually a pretty good rule of thumb. If you're eating 100% whole food plant-based diet the way we teach in these classes, you're probably getting about between 10 and up to 20% of your calories are probably coming from fat. So that's actually good. It's considered, what we consider a low-fat diet would be less than 20% of calories from fat. Most Americans are getting anywhere from 30 to 50% fat. And if someone's doing a ketogenic low-carb diet, they're probably getting 50 to 60% of their calories from fat, and another 20 or 30% from protein, and then only a tiny bit, less than 10% from carbohydrate if they're doing like a keto low carb diet. Standard American diet's usually 30 to 50% fat, maybe 20 to 30% protein, and then another 20-ish%, 30% carbohydrate. But it can vary a bit, but that those macronutrients percentages aren't necessarily that important to remember, to know, because it's someone knowing what their macros are, what their percentages of calories from different macronutrients doesn't necessarily tell you whether they're eating a healthy diet or not, because we know there's good carbs and bad carbs, and good fats and bad fats, and protein, from animals versus from plants. And so you can get lost in the weeds on that, but I don't want to spend a bunch of time on that, but I just want to kind of give you these basic rules. So less than 20% of calories from fat per serving is what we want. And we'll do an example on here, but I'll also do an example on the other handout, because sometimes it's easier on the other handout. So let me go here on here, and let me go to PDF so it's easier to see again. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it on the old label, and then we're going to see how it works on the new label. So it helps to learn the math of how to do this. And so I'm going to get my calculator up and running here on my phone so I can give you the more exact numbers. And so what you look at then is you have your serving size. So in this particular product, its serving size is 2/3 of a cup. And then there's actually 8 servings of whatever this is in this package or container. And so it's always good to pay attention to that as well, because a lot of times the serving size can be really, really small, and they do that on purpose, because then it seems like, oh, there's not that many grams of fat or sugar or sodium or whatever we're looking at. But then you have to figure out, okay, well, how many servings did I just eat? I just ate half this package. So if this package is 8 servings, I just ate 4 servings. So I got to multiply everything by 4 if I'm actually wanting to know how many grams of fat or how much sodium I just ate, that kind of thing. And so it's really important to also kind of pay attention to the serving size. And one of the benefits to the newer food label that we have now today is that they started to put a little bit more reasonable serving sizes on things. They were the food industry was forced to do this. They did not want to do this, but the FDA made them do that. So it's a little bit more, okay, what do people actually eat? So make it more truthful that way. And so so we did get a little bit of a win on that, but we lost in a couple other places, which I'll talk about. So you go, okay, so servings per container, 8, 2/3 of a cup's a serving size. And then you go, okay, so there's 230 calories in a serving. So you see that here, calories, 230. And then on the old food label, it actually told you calories from fat, 72. So it was really easy. All you had to do to get your percent of calories from fat is go 72 divided by 230. And that gives you, carry your decimal, so it's 0.313, so that's 31.3% fat. So this particular product has 31% of the calories are fat in this. And so that's more than our 20% rule, so it'd probably be something we'd want to avoid, especially if we were trying to lose weight. But now with the new food label, they actually don't tell you how many calories are from fat anymore. And the reason they were able to, the food industry was able to get rid of that, this was a loss for us in the nutrition industry, is because they say, well, there's good fat and there's bad fat. So we don't think we should have to put how many calories are from fat. And so they got a win on that. But all you and I have to do is know one additional bit of information to be able to get this number back. And so all you have to remember is how many calories are in a gram of fat. And the answer is 9. So every gram of fat has 9 calories, no matter what kind of fat it is, whether it's good fat or bad fat. Every single gram of fat is 9 calories. And every single gram of protein is 4 calories. And every single gram of carbohydrate is also 4 calories. Alcohol, if you're interested, is about 6 calories per gram. So that's why drinking alcohol is helpful for losing weight, because there's a lot of calories in alcohol. And so you just have to remember that 9 calories at every gram of fat. And so then you look here on the label, it says there's 8 grams of fat, right? It actually told you here that there was 0 trans fat, there's 1 gram of saturated fat, which is important too. We're trying to avoid the saturated fat if we can, because that's what clogs up the heart arteries the greatest. And so actually trans fat's even worse, but it's actually been outlawed from the food supply, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. It doesn't get added to processed foods anymore because it's been outlawed. But we'll go back here to fat. So there's 8 grams of fat in a serving of this, and we already found out 230 was the calories. And this was another win for us. They actually made the calories much larger. You see that? It was 230 calories here on the old label. Now on the new label, it's calories 230. So it's actually, that's kind of helpful. But then here you go. So now you have your 8 grams of fat, and we know that there's 9 calories in every gram of fat. So what's 9 times 8? 72, right? And there we go. We got that 72 number back. So you just take your total total fat grams in a serving, and you multiply that by 9, because we know that there's 9 calories in a gram of fat. Now you got your 72. Take your 72 divided by 230, and we back to that 33% fat number. So any questions about the fat? You got that? Go back to this. There we go. So we got the fat, and then actually we already kind of covered the no trans fat. So it was discussed then because it was right at that transition where they actually started outlawing trans fat, and trans fat was things like Crisco oil, margarine, things like that, and they actually outlawed that from the food supply. So the only trans fats you can get are what are naturally occurring in animal products. There's some trans fat in animal products, so just that occur there naturally, not added. And so we don't have to worry about that. And then cholesterol, if you see something on a list of nutrients, like, it's usually down here. Yeah, here it says less than 300 milligrams of cholesterol, whatever this is. So if you have something that has cholesterol in it, you don't want it because it means it comes from an animal. So if you're trying to lower your risk for heart disease and diabetes and things like that, you actually, one, you don't want the saturated fat because that mostly comes from animals too, and you don't want the cholesterol because that only comes from animals. There's no cholesterol in any plant food. So, and we have no dietary requirement for cholesterol. So our liver makes all the cholesterol we need. We don't actually need any cholesterol. So it's another reason to say, oh, I don't want to have too much saturated fat, and I don't want to have cholesterol. So, so we kind of got these three up here taken care of. Any questions about those so far? Anything in the chat, Charlie?
Yeah, there's one question on, can you talk more about good fat versus bad fats? Like
Sure.
canola oil and whatever.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a whole class you can go back in the archives for nutritional myths and other popular diets where I go way in depth on on that question, but I can give you the shorter answer is just that, we have the fats that are saturated, that are basically solid at room temperature. So you take bacon grease, you fried your bacon on the pan, and then you dump the bacon grease into a jar and put that jar up on the shelf. After a few hours, it's going to be solid. It's just white and solid, and that's saturated fat. So that's the kind of fat that really clogs up the heart arteries, and you don't want that. And so if you look at studies, from heart disease and even cancer and diabetes, actually that saturated fat, which is mostly animals. So there are some saturated fats in nuts and seeds and in coconut, as far as from plants, but the majority of all the saturated fat comes from animal products. So the number one source is actually cheese. Number two source is pizza, which is more cheese essentially. And then I think number three is ice cream. And then there's chicken. Chicken's way up there as well, because even though there's less saturated fat in chicken than in beef, Americans eat so much chicken that it's like the number three or number four source of saturated fat. And then it's basically pastries and pork and all that kind of stuff. So that's where most of all the saturated fat comes from in the American diet. And then the kind of fats that are the good fats would be the fats that come from plants. So that's like your omega-3 fats, like from olive oil and some of the, not the seed oils. You don't want the tropical oils. You don't want the like palm kernel oil or coconut oil and those kind of things. So the healthier fats are the ones like from olive oil, for example, or avocado oil or something like that. But we don't recommend eating oil because oil is just processed. So so the better, more healthy way to get your fats then is to eat nuts and seeds, to eat olives, to eat avocados, because you're going to get all the fiber, all the nutrients, you're going to get everything that's good for you with the good fat. And you don't want to just eat the oil. So it's kind of like eating white sugar. So oil is just the equivalent to refined sugar. So it's like you took a sugar cane or a sugar beet and you stripped out all the fiber and all the nutrients, and you're just left with the white crystalline powder. So the same thing, if you take olives and you just strip out all the nutrients and fiber and all the good stuff about the olive, and you just left with the liquid fat, then that's just a processed food. So yeah, olive oil is better for you than coconut oil, but doesn't necessarily make olive oil healthy. It's just healthier than coconut oil, if that makes sense. And so any other, does that answer your question about the fat?
I have
Again,
a,
I go in.
I have an
Go ahead.
additional question. You know, I saw RFK Jr. He's at a steak and shake restaurant with I don't know, CEO or somebody, and the CEO is bragging about how he's switching from seed oil to lard to cook the fries because that's healthier. Have you
Oh gosh.
heard that?
Yeah, I mean,
No,
I don't.
RFK is death on seed oil, and he's also death on sugar. He calls sugar poison.
Yeah. Well, I would say you would just want to avoid olive oil. So it's, and lard's not good either. It's just saturated fat. So, but they're both going to clog up the arteries and cause inflammation. So yeah, I wouldn't put my, plus yeah, someone's saying I wouldn't put my trust in RFK, as far as he's not a nutritional expert of any kind. So we stick with the science here. So
Well, my question is which is worse? You want to buy, if you're going to eat French fries, you want to have them cooked in seed oil or lard?
yeah, I'd say it's like, do you want to get shot or stabbed? Take your pick. They're both bad. So
Okay.
yeah, that's how I'd answer that. I wouldn't recommend either. I wouldn't say you could call one better or worse than the other, but you could definitely say olive oil is the better choice than the lard or the seed oil. I could say that, but that still doesn't make olive oil a healthy product. If that makes sense.
Alice,
Yeah, so like, if you buy like hummus, it's gonna have seed oils in it, and like if you buy a processed hummus, don't make it yourself. So like how bad are the seed oils? I guess that's my question,
They're
and
they're just really high in omega-6 fats, and so they're really inflammatory. So it's, yeah, I mean, I have found in Eugene anyway, I have found a hummus that's in the store that doesn't have any oil in it. They usually just use some tahini, and that would be a better choice because it's just ground up sesame seeds. It's not actually oil. It's not as processed, if that makes sense. But yeah, ultimately it'd be better just to make your own hummus if you wanted to avoid that. But you know, there's a difference between having a little bit of oil in a hummus that you're eating versus like cooking in it or frying French fries in it. Because eating a French fry is very unhealthy, very inflammatory because there's a lot of oil because it's high temperature, you're frying it. It's going to have a bigger difference, a much more inflammatory response on your body eating a French fry, no matter what kind of oil you fry it in, versus having a little bit of hummus on your dipping your vegetables in some hummus, which is going to be high in antioxidants, and you got the fiber with the hummus because you're getting beans that way, and there's just a little bit of oil in it versus frying something in oil. That hopefully just giving you that perspective, right?
someone's asking about ghee. What about ghee?
Is that the
G
clarified
H
butter?
G H E E. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
saturated fat, I believe.
Right. I think it's clarified butter, I think is what it is. So yeah, it's one of the reasons there's so many health problems in India. So even when they had a lot of vegetarians, which they still do, the ghee is something that they're really. I just saw a lecture by through the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I think it's Dr. Raman, her name is, and she's from India, and she's been lecturing around medical schools all over India, and she's trying to do more whole food plant based for the people of India. And she actually even talked about ghee there, about how they're trying to use more healthy traditional recipes, but then try to avoid things like ghee. All right, let me move on here so we get through the food label reading, but then we should still have time for plenty of questions. So let's get to sodium here. So with sodium, you want the amount of sodium to be less than the number of calories per serving. So this is also pretty easy. We can even just stick with this food label here. So again, the 270 calories. And then the sodium down here, if you can read that, it says sodium 130 milligrams. So this actually meets the rule. So we call it the 1-to-1 rule is kind of the way to remember it. 1-to-1 or less. And so what you want then is you want the number of milligrams of sodium to be the same or less than the number of calories per serving. So this is 270 calories and only 130 milligrams of sodium. So this actually passes the sodium rule. And this is pretty good. And where this rule came from is if you were to be eating mostly all processed foods, for example, let's just say everything you ate had a food label on it, and we're just thinking about sodium, not anything else nutrition wise. We're just focusing on sodium. The 1-to-1 rule was created because the average person eats about 2,000 to 2,300 calories per day if you're following a diet, kind of a USRDA type of a recommended diet, balanced diet. They recommend that the average person, it's going to vary based on your weight, your size, your physical activity, or how much sweating you do and things like that. The actual RDA, the recommended dietary allowance for sodium is about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. And so the average person's eating about 2,300 calories. So the recommendation is about 2,300 milligrams of sodium. Then if you follow the 1-to-1 rule, you'll achieve that. And so, but if you look at the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, they're usually recommending down around 1,500 milligrams of sodium or even less. And so people with heart failure sometimes they want to have even less than that. And so there's actually no too low sodium diet that's ever been recorded. In fact, Dr. Greger has some videos on nutrition facts where they've studied tribes in Africa and in the Amazon rainforest where they're eating like 300 or 400 milligrams of sodium a day is all. And because that's usually what's naturally occurring in plants. So just because sodium is a mineral, so it's in the soil. So if you were drinking stream water, if you were eating just roots and tubers and berries and just foods that grow in the earth, you're still going to be getting at least 300 or 400 milligrams of sodium a day. So they're very healthy, and there's no too low sodium diet that exists. And so when you hear about people getting low sodium in their blood, that's usually not from low sodium in the diet. It's usually from too much fluid, too much water, and it dilutes out the blood basically. So that's where this 1-to-1 rule comes. And just to kind of give you a more extreme example, I know I probably should look again pretty soon, but there was we all know that Campbell's chicken noodle soup is really salty, right? If you think about chicken noodle soup, it's really salty. And if you look at the 1-to-1 rule on that label, I believe there is 70 calories in a serving of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. So it's a small serving. And there's 900 milligrams of sodium in that serving. So it should only be, if it's following the 1-to-1 rule, it should only have 70 milligrams of sodium in it, but it's got 900. So it's way over. So the average American's getting well over 3,000 milligrams, upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams of sodium a day, way high. And so, that's a problem. And sodium is one of the biggest dietary excesses that leads to the most death and disease, high blood pressure, and all these kinds of things. So check out Dr. Greger's, some of his videos on sodium. And just to give you some perspective, 1,500 milligrams of sodium is about 2/3 of a teaspoon of salt. So sodium chloride is table salt, and so about 2/3 of a teaspoon are at about 1,500 milligrams of sodium. And so if you're trying to lower your salt, you really want to avoid processed food, because you'll see if you go to the grocery store and look at the food labels, you'll see that most foods are more than the 1-to-1 rule. And so that would already put you over the 2,300 there. But then the other thing to remember is that if you're eating mostly whole plant foods without labels, that's going to make the biggest difference as far as you're cutting your sodium. because 70 to 80% of all the sodium in the American diet comes from processed foods. So you actually get, and to go back with the minimum sodium amount, not to worry about that, but one slice of wheat, of bread, whether it's whole wheat or whatever, one slice of bread has enough sodium in it to sustain you for a day. I mean, that would be enough. And like I said, you don't really have to ever worry about too little, but so by cutting out processed foods, you're going to be knocking out 70 to 80% of all the sodium in your diet. And so that leaves you the ability I'll talk about two other things. So if you really trying to cut your sodium, cut out processed food, that's number one, which is good for so many other health reasons we've talked about in these classes. And then two, don't put it in your cooking, because if you add salt to your cooking and your recipes, it takes a lot of sodium or a lot of salt to make it taste salty, to taste like it's seasoned. It takes a lot more. But if you don't cook with salt at all and you just use herbs and spices and things, but then when your food is prepared and it's on your plate and you're getting ready to eat it at the table, if you want to go ahead and put a little pinch of salt on the surface of the food, one, that's hardly any. It's very, very small, because you think about how much 2/3 of a teaspoon would be on your plate. That would be awful, right? You wouldn't even be able to eat it. It'd be so salty. And so just that tiny little pinch on the surface of your food will taste very salty. It doesn't take very much to hit the surface of your tongue to give you that salty flavor. And so that's the way to get you to eat a plant-based diet, and then avoid the processed foods. Don't use it in the cooking, but then put a little bit on your plate, at the plate, if you feel like you need it at that point. And so that's the kind of the best way to go to try to reduce your salt or sodium intake. And we recommend that, and Dr. Greger does too, that you use like an iodized salt, just the blue Morton's iodized salt, because you get the little extra iodine that way. Because if you're doing like, sea salt or Himalayan salt or these other salts that people market and try to sell that have health benefits and things like that, you're not going to get the iodine. And again, we don't need extra salt. Most of us are getting too much, and so that's just a little tip there. But so does that make sense? The 1-to-1 rule for sodium? Any questions about that? Definitely recommend some of those videos from nutritionfacts.org about sodium. It's really, really interesting. All right. Yeah, and I guess right here it does say 1-to-1 ratio or less right there. So, all right, this next tab says carbohydrates, look for whole grain. So when you look at a label, you want it to say not, if there's whole grain, 100% whole grain or whole wheat, you want it to be whole. The word whole is really important in there. So that's one thing to look for when you're looking at the label, at the ingredients and things. And then another has to do with the fiber. Of course, we don't want to have added sugar. And I want to show you something on the added sugar before I go into the fiber. Let me see here. Go back here again. And so this is the other victory that we got when we changed the food labels. So they used to only have to just put sugar. Sugar is 12 grams here. So it's the total carbohydrates, 37 grams in a serving, which is the 230 calories in a serving, 37 grams of carbohydrate, and then 12 grams of sugar is all they had to do. But now what they had to add is, so there's 12 grams of sugar in this, like it says here, but it says includes 10 grams of added sugar. So what this means is there was only 2 grams of sugar naturally occurring in whatever this product is. And then they actually physically added 10 grams of sugar per serving. And so that you might want to avoid that, because it's like, oh, they added sugar to it. Why did they do that? Right. And of course, to make it taste better, so it's more addicting for us. So we'll want to buy it again. Right. And so they didn't want to have to add that, but they were made to add that by the FDA. So we lost in a couple of places, but we won in a couple other places. So that's good. And then so let's go back here. I'll bounce back and forth. And so so we had the no added sugar, and then come on, pull up. There it goes. Okay. And then the fiber is really important. So there's two different rules. One rule is that if it has at least 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving, that's usually a pretty good sign it's a whole grain. And so we talked about having the word whole grain or whole wheat or something there. So if it has at least 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving, that's usually a pretty good sign that they didn't refine it too heavily and they didn't strip out too much of the fiber. Although sometimes they can add a little bit of fiber back into it, to kind of supplement it, so it makes it seem healthier. But then the other rule, which is a little bit more challenging to follow when you're trying to eat healthy, and if you're including some processed foods with labels in your diet to follow, is it's called the 5-to-1 rule. 5-to-1, and what that means is there, for every 5 grams of carbohydrate, there's at least 1 gram of fiber. And so it's pretty easy. It's another math problem here. And so let's figure out if this meets the 5-to-1 rule. So 1 gram of fiber for every 5 grams of carbohydrate, and this is again per serving. So this product has 37 grams of carbohydrate per serving, and it has 4 grams of fiber. So the easiest way I like to do if it's a 5-to-1 is to take the number of grams of fiber and multiply it by 5. So 4 grams of fiber times 5 is 20. And so this only have 20 grams of carbohydrate if it has 4 grams of fiber. So this does not meet the 5-to-1 rule. It's more like 9-to-1, right? Because if you how many times does 4 go into 37? So that's the other thing you can do is just take 37 divided by 4. So that's about 9, because 9 times 4 is 36, right? So it's about a 9-to-1 rule. So that's not very good when it comes to that, even though it does have 4 grams of fiber in it, which meets the other rule. It doesn't come close even on the 5-to-1 rule. So it's got a little bit of fiber, but it's still not the healthiest, whatever this is. So because of that particular problem. So I know common things like shredded wheat or grape nuts, for example. I think they're about 7-to-1, which is a little bit better. So it means it has quite a bit of fiber in it. And then I think the only bread I know of is Ezekiel bread. I think Ezekiel bread, if you guys know what that is, I think it does meet the 5-to-1 rule. So that's actually a pretty good bread. It's going to be really whole grain and give you lots of fiber and feed your gut microbiome, all the stuff we talk about, and what Dr. Ross is going to talk about next week is importance of fiber and gastrointestinal health and cancer and how important fiber is. That's next week's class. But so that's that. So any questions about fiber, the 5-to-1 rule, or just obviously having a lot of fiber per serving is a good thing. And one little caveat is this does not count when you're looking at a completely like whole grain. Like sometimes you'll see even in the bulk bin or something, you see a nuts or seeds or quinoa or something like that. It'll say sometimes if it comes in a box, they'll have to put a label on it. Or a bag, it'll have to have a food label, and it'll just say, barley or quinoa, or that's the only ingredient, one ingredient, and will say how many grams of carbohydrates per serving and how many grams of fiber per serving. This 5-to-1 rule does not count for that because that's a whole food. It hasn't been processed in any way. It's just there it is. It's just oat groats or sorghum or barley or farro or brown rice. It's just the whole grain. So don't look at that and apply the grams of fiber or the 5-to-1 rule for that. This is only for things that have been processed. And so that's still wanted to mention that because that can throw you off sometimes. Like, well, this is quinoa and it doesn't meet the 5-to-1 rule. So I shouldn't eat this. It's like, no, yeah, you should, because it's a complete whole food. It has not been processed.
You want to hit on oat milk. It's hydrolyzed, a bit processed. However, it has oats and water is the only ingredient. Is hydrolyzation a problem in this product?
Right. So it is a processed food. So then you do want to pay attention to the food label. And obviously the main thing, because you're smart to look at that. Oh, it's just soy and water or oats and water. And so, yeah, there might be some preservatives, some colorings, some gums and things like that, because what they're trying to do is make it white, make it more shelf stable. So there are some bad things when it comes to that, but if you compare the soy milk or the oat milk to dairy milk or a lot of other processed or animal products, it's still a better option. So it's, again, like we always compare, like, is the food healthy? Well, compared to what? So if you're going to put some soy milk or oat milk in on your cereal, your oatmeal or something like that, that's still a better choice than doing, like, full fat dairy or even low fat dairy, because I could talk for another hour about just that question is, what are all the things that are bad about that's in this product versus this product. But I think what the most important thing for this class is just to go, okay, so I've learned how to read a food label. So, okay, yeah, there's some ingredients there I don't really recognize on the label, some of these preservatives and stuff, maybe not the best, but I'm not going to sit and drink glass after glass after glass of this. I'm just going to put a little bit of this oat milk or soy milk on my oatmeal. And so what I think the more important things on that would be to make sure it doesn't have added sugar in it. So if it has added sugar, sugar is inflammatory, it's not healthy, it's just empty calories. So if you can do a no sugar, soy milk or oat milk or something like that, that would be the better choice.
And then the last question in the chat, what are the added sugars that some companies put on some balsamic vinegars labels?
Yeah, there's a little bit. I know I've noticed that too. And then also if it doesn't just say straight up sugar on that food label, the tips for food label reading, that's the first handout I showed, that's several pages. They actually give you examples of the names for sugar, all the different names of sugar that you might not recognize. So they have all these long names that it's just ways to, they list it as a chemical name, so you don't really recognize it. So you don't recognize it as sugar, even though it is. And so take a look at that as well. But I guess, vinegar is such a healthy food, and balsamic vinegar is so healthy that I guess the little bit of sugar they might add to it, wouldn't be too concerned about it. But I don't know if you can buy a balsamic vinegar that doesn't have any in it. I'd have to look at the label on mine if I even recognize it as being sugar. I don't think so, but it does kind of have a little bit of a sweet taste to it. Somebody else might know the answer to that.
I don't have the answer, but I use it also. I haven't noticed, and the amount of balsamic vinegar that's used is so small, the amount of sugar would be pretty minimal.
Yeah, exactly. All right, then, yeah, no added oil is really important too. So yeah, looking at the label for that, because that's what you'll see. Like, I remember early on when I was transitioning and doing this 12 years ago, even back then, I would get kind of seduced by some of these labels. I'd see, like, oh, because I was doing all this cooking, and oh, look at this. There's this packaged food here at Costco, and it's just a quinoa bean and quinoa, right? Like a rice bowl, or these different kind of lentils and grains, kind of bowls that you could just get and add hot water. And oh, this would be great. I can just throw this in the microwave or whatever. And then when I started learning about food label reading and whatnot, I'd look at the label and, oh my gosh, look at how much salt was added to it. Look how much oil was added to it, or even sugar sometimes. And so it kind of, oh gosh, yeah, I just need to stick to making this at home. One, it's cheaper, and if I make it at home, and two, it doesn't have the added salt, the added sugar, the added oil. So that's where you fall into the trap. And just to kind of go back to the fat rule, less than 20%. That you guys all know about Cafe Yum, the Yum bowls that they sell. So you can stores actually sell Yum sauce, and you can actually grab a bottle of Yum sauce and look at the label. And if you do the 20% rule on Yum sauce, it's actually 88% fat. So it's basically just pure oil, basically, with some flavorings and stuff. And I know on some of the cookbooks, whole food plant-based cookbooks, you can actually make a oil-free vegan Yum sauce. They actually have recipes for that. So you can make something there, or you can just use salsa or something else. But yeah, if you're trying to lose weight, you want to avoid that oil, avoid anything that's more than 20% fat. And so that's just another example of the kind of, like I gave the example on the salt with the Campbell's chicken noodle soup. The yum sauce is a good example. So you can, because you can go and get like I go to Cafe Yum sometimes, and I get a yum bowl with so it's a vegan one, so it's just got rice and beans and vegetables and stuff in it, and then I sometimes I'll add a little avocado. I usually take it home because then I can add some salsa, some low sodium salsa I have at home, and add a little bit of that, or the tofu sour cream I make, I can add a little bit of that to it, and then that way I don't use the yum sauce, because the yum sauce is just total fat.
Going back
So
to the
yeah.
balsamic vinegar sugar content, there are benefits for some. I think Gregor has a video on it actually, despite the sugar content. And it's grape juice oftentimes. Some research suggests that balsamic vinegar can actually improve blood sugar control in certain individuals, particularly diabetics, due to the presence of acetic acid.
Yeah, it helps you make nitric oxide, and actually stimulates CCK, which is a cholecystokinin enzyme, and which has actually been shown to help with weight loss. I think it's in Dr. Greger's 21 Tweaks for Weight Loss in his How Not to Diet book. He actually has the vinegar in there, I think a tablespoon a day or something, right? But yeah, I stopped sharing so you guys can ask as many questions as you want. Was that helpful on the food label? Do you have any questions about those main things to look at? Because a lot of the other things on there, a dietitian like Thomas, when he's done the class and stuff, can go into way more detail on all the other percentages and RDAs and all this stuff, and it's very in depth, but not all that helpful for your overall health. It's just kind of information. It doesn't necessarily mean it's helpful. And then Jeff Novick also has who I've shared with in these classes about calorie density and things like that. He actually also has, I think you have to pay for it now, but I think I watched it when he was during the pandemic. He was offering a bunch of his videos and stuff for free, and I watched a ton of them back then. And he had like a whole in-depth class on reading food labels, which was really interesting. So I learned a lot. But when it's all said and done, is like, oh, it was interesting, but not necessarily some of that detail that I didn't go into today is not necessarily all that helpful when you're just trying to improve your health, get off medications, things like that. Where what I shared with you today is just kind of the nuts and bolts of what's important.
Doug.
You mentioned a little bit about these milks. I consume a couple cups a day of Silk brand soy milk. Other than vitamins and minerals, the only additive is a Gelen gum. Is that problematic that I'm drinking that much soy milk?
No.
Yeah, Gregor recommends 3 to 5 servings of soy a day. So whether that's from soy milk or edamame or tofu or tempeh, miso, those are all your soy products. And the healthiest would be the actual edamame, the whole soybean. But as long as you're not exceeding 3 to 5 servings a day, and a serving for soy milk would be a cup. So as long as you're not exceeding like 5 cups a day, it's not a problem. But if you're drinking 3 to 5 cups of soy milk a day, and you're still eating tons of tofu and all that, then you might be getting a little bit too much soy. But otherwise, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question that's not exactly related to food labels. Could
Go
I
ahead.
ask that now? So,
Sure.
so I make stir fry, and for a long time I have made it with mirin, which is rice wine, and with soy sauce. And I was talking to a friend, the friend we talked to last week or 2 weeks ago. We introduced ourselves. He got me into all this. God help him. And he got help me. And so I looked it up. He said, "Does it all cook off?" And I said, "Yeah, it just cooks off. The alcohol cooks off." It doesn't. It cooks down, but it leaves about 10% alcohol. So I stopped using that and I started using balsamic vinegar instead, because one of the things I learned was that if you add balsamic vinegar to unripe fruit, the fruit will taste ripe when you eat it, if you let it sit a little bit. So I started using the balsamic vinegar to deglaze the pan, and then he suggested, the soy sauce is so high in salt and I don't tolerate salt well. So he suggested using miso instead, because miso is soybeans. It's it's more of a whole food. Is there any view about that and whether or not it's better to use miso than to use soy sauce? Because soy sauce, if it's brewed, it's fermented, right? And fermented foods are supposed to be good for you, but they're real high in sodium. I have to avoid them.
Well, miso is also fermented. So miso is fermented soy, which would be a better alternative than the soy sauce. And then if you kind of get tired of miso and you kind of want something more similar to soy sauce but less sodium, then I would go with coconut aminos. So coconut aminos liquid aminos are lower in sodium than soy sauce, but coconut aminos are lower in sodium than uh, liquid aminos, if that makes sense. So so if you're just using it as a flavoring, did you have any questions about, as far as when you saute vegetables, you can use just water, or you can use
I do use water. I do use water.
yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
I was checking on the oil thing.
That, I used to really finely dice the ginger and the garlic, but if you dice it larger, it doesn't burn as easily. It doesn't turn into a smear with the water. With the oil, it's each piece is kind of covered with oil. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it's so loud in my house. I've got dogs and bells, and so I apologize. But if you cut it bigger, then sauteing it in the water is quite easy, and you can get it browned without having it burn.
Yeah, and you could also saute in vegetable stock. Vegetable stock would give it more flavor, and you might not need as much of the flavoring sauces.
Find a decent vegetable stock without. I buy low sodium vegetable stock, and if you buy no chicken stock, it is made without tomato. So if you want to avoid, some dishes are appropriate, tomatoes are appropriate for, and sometimes they're not. So,
Yeah.
so
Elizabeth, well, this is something that I do. I take the ends of my carrots, the ends of my celery, and everything I buy is organic.
yes,
Ends of the cauliflower, the asparagus, all that stuff. I put it into a big pot, boil it for 15 minutes, let it steep for 2 hours, and then I have a pan that I can sift it in, and then I have my broth. I make my own broth.
right.
No sodium in it.
I like the commercial broths. I just don't
Well, I
like.
can't, I started that because I could not find anything without chemicals in it.
Right. Well, they've got it without chemicals, but not without salt. And some of them
To
have.
me, that's a chemical.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I was wondering is, I think you could brew your own soy sauce. What about you brewing soy sauce with potassium instead of
Potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. Yeah.
exactly.
Right. So yeah, that's an option. And then it's also like Mrs. Dash and some of those things, because they actually have potassium chloride. Some people people with kidney disease have to be careful with too much potassium. So you'd have to talk to your doctor before you would switch from sodium chloride to potassium chloride. But yeah, just a disclaimer.
Yeah. Okay. I used to always use that kind of no salt. And then I moved away from it. I moved back to, I don't know, Himalayan pink salt or something. And now I'm kind of moving away from that again. So this is interesting. I'll see about getting it, getting a starter and brewing my own soy sauce and then making my own style. I mean, this is like going back to the 60s. Really, some of the things I'm doing, it really makes me laugh. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Full circle, huh?
Full circle.
Yeah. Well, great. Thanks for the question. Any other questions, comments, anything about anything, food label reading or anything? It's fine.
I guess I am still curious about the balsamic vinegar because when I go shopping for it now, I mean, it says, let's say maybe it has 4 sugars and then it says no added sugars, or it says 4 sugars and 2 added sugars. And I just don't know what that really means. It has its own sugars. That's the first part. And then it says either no added or some added.
Yeah, I guess I would buy one that says no added if I
Yeah,
could,
no
but
added.
I need to
right.
look at mine. I can't remember if I get the big bottle at Costco, but they didn't have it there the last time. I've been buying that for years because it's this huge bottle and I go through a lot of it because that's on all my salads. I use it as a
Yeah,
dressing.
right. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of
I
different
guess
ones.
it's beautiful. Yeah, it's pretty minuscule, but I can go look if
Okay. Yeah.
Charlie's answering a question or something.
Yeah, I think the Kirkland has some added, but then some are less added than more, Yeah.
What about corn tortillas? Are they good or bad?
Well, corn tortilla, how is it made? What's put in it? How much, if you're looking on the label, it's gonna have a label because it's a processed food. So you take corn and you chop it up and you make corn flour, which is not very tasty by itself. So you're going to add something to it. What are you going to add? You're going to probably add some salt. You're going to probably add some fat. And so different companies put different amounts in. And so before I would say that the corn tortilla is a healthy choice, I would say you need to really look on the label and you need to ask yourself if you're having any health problems, maybe it'd be better to use the bowl instead of the shell, or make the shell a leaf of collard green or whatever it might be if you want to put something in something else. If you're otherwise healthy, having occasional corn tortilla, probably fine.
I was looking at the label for corn tortillas at Costco. They have guar gum, cellulose gum, propionic acid, benzoic acid, phosphoric acid, and folic.
Kind of like a chemistry set.
Yeah, I grew up and live in Southern California. In fourth grade, they study, Hispanic influence and the Mexicans, and we made every year the fourth graders made corn tortillas. It was, dry hominy soaked in lime water, and then we had metate. We ground it, and it's just cornmeal with some lime left over.
The other issue with the highly processed forms of natural foods is the issue of where does it get absorbed? Do you think it gets absorbed higher up in your intestinal tract, or do you think that when you eat it, it doesn't get digested very quickly and makes it down to the end of your small intestine where the L cells are, where you can produce GLP-1? What do you think about that? Where do you think it's absorbed? High up or low down?
Probably higher up. Probably better to eat hominy, whole hominy, than.
There is the answer.
Yeah.
If if you want to produce your own GLP-1 and save yourself $1,000 a month from having to take Ozempic or Wegovy, you want to, and that's the other issue with bread. It's high, it's processed up enough so the majority of it will be absorbed high up as opposed to being released way down at the end of your intestine area. And it's not that it's bad, it's just that it doesn't give you the maximum health benefit.
So I have my balsamic vinegar here. If you can see it, it's the one from Costco. So it's the Kirkland brand organic balsamic vinegar of Modena. And so you look at it, the ingredients list, all it says is organic cooked grape must and organic wine vinegar. That's it. Doesn't even have sugar listed on the ingredients list, but it does say it has 10 grams of sugar and a tablespoon is the serving size. And then total sugar is 9, includes 6 grams of added sugar. So, I mean, if it's comes from, if it's ferment or, if it's, basically fermented grapes or whatever to make wine vinegar, and it's probably, a lot of it's probably some of it's the natural sugar in the fruit, I guess, the grape. That's, I guess I don't know anything about how they make it. But then it looks like even though it's not on the ingredients list, it does say they've added 6 grams of added sugar. But I think about tablespoon or whatever, and it takes me probably 2 months to go through this bottle myself. So it's still maybe better if it was not, but not added. But it does say here, matured in oak casks, this balsamic vinegar of Modena is thick and sweet, making it a great addition to your cooked vegetables, meats, and salads, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so it does have some added sugar.
Also, I was going to say that Food for Life has a sprouted corn tortilla. Yeah.
And Trader Joe's carries a corn tortilla that doesn't have a lot of additives. Pretty good. I think
Well,
it's
thank you. I
organic.
didn't know that.
Yeah. Doesn't have all the extra chemicals. But I have my, I don't want to sound like poster child for Trader Joe's, but I have my balsamic from Trader Joe's, and it says the same thing. Same ingredients, no sugar, but 6 grams of added sugar. I don't know if that's the grape must
I
or
don't know.
what.
I don't know,
yeah. Same ingredients that you listed, exactly the same. So,
Well, it's a Dr. Esselstyn has all of his patients that reverse their heart disease put balsamic vinegar on every serving of greens that they eat, so and they reverse their heart disease. So it can't cause much of any inflammation because otherwise they wouldn't have reversed their heart disease. I don't think it. I think it's like we're splitting hairs probably.
How much do you put on? What's the quantity?
Like on my salad, I probably put a tablespoon on my salad. If I'm eating a big salad for a meal, I'd probably use a tablespoon, I bet. It's pretty strong, Other questions anybody have, or comments, or share a success or a challenge, or we're here for all that kind of stuff.
well, I have to say, I'm really glad we read Casey Means' book because
Yeah.
now she's the Surgeon General.
Well, she's up for a vote. It hasn't been voted on
Oh,
yet.
it hasn't been approved yet. Okay, I thought it was
I know she
a
was.
done deal.
I know, is that crazy? I saw that because my wife was telling me about it. Like, oh yeah, there's this person up for Surgeon General, and she started talking about her. Went to Stanford, but didn't finish her surgical residency. I went, oh, is it Casey Means? She said, how'd you know that? Well, that's the book we just read. Oh boy.
And then, our new book is China Study, which I had read years ago, but I picked it up again. And I was so impressed with the contrast, the kindness with which he writes. He credits anyone he ever collaborated with. He's such a nice, gentlemanly kind of, you can just feel it coming through the book. And it's like, man, what a contrast to that Good Energy book. Yeah.
Yeah, he's very he's very Yeah, I call him the Yoda. He's the Yoda of nutrition, because he's the most decorated nutritional scientist, arguably ever. So I mean, it's just a lot of credibility, and he's so kind. I've actually met him. I actually talked to him before at a conference, so it's pretty cool. Well, we can always end early if you guys don't have any more questions.
What about choline? Is that, getting so much choline? Do you know anything about that, or do you have anything?
Mhm.
Been- Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Choline is in dairy, so it's in dairy, seafood, dairy, and eggs is where it's in high content. So, and then carnitine is in red meat for the most part. So carnitine and choline. So that's those two things are actually feed inflammation in the body and heart disease. So the TMAO. So that's the fuel for the TMAO. If you heard us talk about that. So trimethylamine and oxide. So the basically, if you're eating meat, dairy, and eggs and seafood and things like that, you're going to have more carnitine, more choline. And so then you start to select for bacteria in your colon that process this carnitine and choline, turn it into trimethylamine, then it goes to your liver and becomes trimethylamine and oxide. And TMAO, this chemical, is really bad. It actually drives the dense particles of cholesterol into your artery walls. It leads to, it plays a role in heart disease and heart failure and cancer, and so it's very, very bad. And so you want to like if you took an antibiotic at the same time you're eating these foods that contain choline and carnitine, it actually decreases the amount of TMAO produced. Or you can be a vegan and suddenly eat some meat, dairy, and eggs, and you won't actually produce the TMAO because you don't have the bacteria that convert that carnitine and choline into the TMAO. So very interesting. Dr. Greger has a bunch of videos on that particular topic. So to answer your question more directly, yeah, you want to avoid the excess carnitine and choline. So choline is not something we need some, and we get it from plants as well, but very much less amounts. And then also it's having that good microbiome in your colon that won't convert what carnitine and choline is there into this bad chemical trimethylamine.
Unfortunately, I don't remember the source, but I read something. There's an RDA for choline, like 460 units, something like that. Have you ever heard
Right.
that? And
Yeah, it is
to
a
get that
required
from
nutrient.
Plants, it seems like it'd be very difficult to get that much.
Yeah, you haven't heard of any specific diseases related to choline deficiency, but you're eating completely plants, you're still generally getting enough choline and the amount that you need, but then you're not going to convert it into this TMAO product.
Well, I need to chime in a moment about balsamic vinegar because you, Scott, and Alice, have piqued my interest, and I had to walk downstairs and look at my bottle. And I must tell you, my wife buys this online, and it seems like it's an exorbitant price that she's been paying over the last couple years. I mean, she buys 12 bottles at a time, and I just thought, well, I don't know, was over $100, or I can't remember the exact amount. And I said, gee, that seems like an awful lot of money for those. But bottom line is, this is from Olive Pit, aged balsamic vinegar, de Modena, what is it? Modena, and it's 16.9 fluid ounces, and total sugar is 7 grams. And the includes 1 gram of added sugar,
So it's
not
less than ours.
10
Yeah.
grams. So there are balsamic vinegars. If the sugar is an issue with you, it's the Olive Pit traditional style that you can get online. They ship it to you in this container, which is really, you have a lot of waste of paper goods. I just had to chime in. I'd never given it much thought at all. It's a fun discussion we've had on balsamic vinegar and sugar tonight.
So it's olive pit traditional style Modenic, Modena,
Aged balsamic vinegar day, Modena,
Modena.
Modena. And
Mod-
it's 500 mLs or 16.9 fluid ounces. So you go online to the olive pit.
Yeah.
Several weeks ago, I read something recommending several brands, and I'm surprised I remembered it, but that was one of the brands these experts recommended.
And I think
Also-
that's the one. I think that's the one that Dr. Esselstyn recommends too. I seem to recall him saying olive pit before.
And then mine is the Napa Valley Naturals. And that also, because I've been looking around, and then
That's
this
a
one,
good brand.
this one has oh, where is it? Now I can't see it, but it was zero. Oh yeah, zero added sugars.
Hmm. Total
Sugars are 2 grams and 0 added sugars.
Wow, nice.
I've been searching.
Good for you.
I don't know.
Well, you know, balsamic vinegar is from red wine. I mean, that's where it starts, right? So it's going to have some sugar in it.
That's right, yeah. You know, I wanted to also add into what Alice was saying about that Dr. Campbell, right? And the China study. I have to say, like originally I just felt really inspired. But then also I have such sadness from it, you know, because it's so clear. And then you know people that are going through such hard times. And then it's, you know, the truth is not allowed to come out somehow, you know, in a big level. So it just seems so sad. I have to just be honest, you know.
Yeah.
I had the same reaction last week when I walked through Winco, and absolutely everything was either meat or carbohydrates with sugar, or, you know, I mean, it was just, there was almost no place I could look to shop. I just felt so sad. But, you know, you shop in the bulk aisle and the vegetable aisle. That's what you do in a grocery store.
Where I read about that brand was in Jane and Ann Esselstyn's cookbook,
Yeah.
Be a Plant-Based Woman Warrior cookbook. And that's where I read that olive pit brand. That's one of a couple they recommended.
Yeah, that's right.
I wanted to point out that there's another Trader Joe's product. That's the balsamic glaze. And it also has added sugars, 8 total sugars and 5 added. But you use such a small quantity because it's so concentrated that I find that this is really kind of easy to use too. So just shout out to Trader Joe's again. And I don't like to give Trader Joe's a lot of business because most of their stuff is so packaged and processed. But this one I like.
Their soy milk is also good. The soy milk in a box
Yes.
is very good.
Hey, does anyone have any suggestions for sweetening like drinks like coffee or tea?
Not to do it.
You know, I find I was a huge sugar addict, and particularly in coffee. And I have found that by making it with soy milk, I tried coconut milk, that was the best, but I couldn't tolerate it because it had too much fat in it, made me sick. But using soy milk, no fat, I just make lattes. That's what I do. And that cuts the caffeine, the acidity of the coffee.
Hmm.
I drink decaffeinated anyway. I can't tolerate caffeine, but if I use the milk, the soy milk, make lattes, then it tastes sweet to me now.
You can put a date and then just blend it, or even put it at the bottom because that'll sweeten it.
Yeah, it will, but that's got a lot of sugar, and if you're not eating the whole food, then that kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Well,
we-
yeah, but if you have the whole date,
powder. But it like, I don't know, I guess it would collect at the bottom and then you just drink it.
you could blend it.
And I,
I already did.
when I make smoothies for a while, I was making it with a date, and I would chop up the date very fine, and then I would add hot water to it and mash it until it turned into kind of a mash. And then I'd put it in the smoothie, because the smoothie would be cold, but that would get it blended well enough to get the sugar distributed through the whole drink. And you could do that with your coffee, I suppose.
Also, some of the herb teas, like I like sweet and spicy tea, and I think it has like orange peel, which is kind of sweet. It tastes sweeter than it says it doesn't have any sugar in it. Are you familiar with that brand, Sweet and Spicy? They sell it, it's a like a tea bag tea, but some of the herb teas are kind of sweetened, but without sugar.
With fruit.
Yeah,
Fruit.
but not even like it says it doesn't have sugar calories in it. Like it's just the essence of the fruit kind of thing.
Cool.
I just like putting up a date in my coffee.
Ultimately, everybody's on a different level or journey with when it comes to different foods as far as triggers or health goals. Or like
Right.
for me personally, I just had to recently stop putting any sugary, even though it was oat milk creamer, it had sugar in it. And so it's like what really tells the truth to me about myself is that when I just drink it black now, I still drink it, not as much as I was. I just drink decaf, black decaf coffee. It's not like lighting my brain. It's like I still enjoy the taste of the coffee, but it's not, I don't like crave it. I'm not like, oh, I really want a cup of coffee. Because it was the sugar that I was responding to, not the coffee. So it's like, it really tells the truth. It's like, well, I do have a sugar issue. And so I gotta, that just recently started doing that to try to get out. It's not the sugar. I want to avoid the sugar. So I just drink it black, and it's going to take some time to get used to it, but I know I'll get used to it.
And my sister's husband came back down with diabetes, and so she got really good about getting rid of all sugar. And after a few months, she got some wheat thins. She loves wheat thins, and she could no longer eat them because their taste had changed so much. They just tasted too sickly sweet. So after a few months, if you can really be good about cutting sugar out, your taste change, just like your taste for salt. I live in a retirement community, and a couple months ago, all the food they prepare, they no longer add any salt to the foods. And because so many, a bunch of old people, a lot of people have blood pressure problems, so they just did away with the added salt. And I'm used to it now. Initially, you wanted some salt, but it doesn't bother me now.
Okay.
There's been a lot about the plastics, microplastics, and one of the things they've talked about is tea bags. And I know it's a couple of months ago they changed brands that they have here. They went to Twinings and Bigelow, and I was reading something about a week ago that all their tea bags don't have plastic, and I assume that's why they did that. And that's something I guess we need to look at.
That's like a really progressive retirement community.
Yeah, it's an amazing community. There's about 400 people in it. It was started by members of the Brethren Church. I think most of them came from Indiana, and they were suffering persecution. They came to Laverne. It was out in the middle of nowhere. You know, it's about 40, at the time, about 40 miles east of downtown LA. And they started growing citrus as one of their big things. They're farmers. And they still have that Christian ethic. You know, it's a very service oriented. I never even heard of them, but it's a very service oriented religion. But anyway, you know, it's very well run. It's nonprofit. It's the only place. You know, we looked at other places, and most of them now are owned by corporations that own 30 or 50 of these, and they do it for profit. Here, it's to serve the people that live here. They started it just for their own members who were getting old, and then, you know, got bigger and bigger, and they let other people into it.
Well, Scott, what's going on for next week?
It's your talk on fiber and gastrointestinal health along with its relation to cancer. So fiber's relationship to improving gastrointestinal health and cancer. So you're up.
Okay. Sounds like fun. And boy, the hour and a half went by pretty fast tonight, as usual. And we really appreciate everybody's input. And looks like we'll see most of you back next week, perhaps.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you.
And everybody.
Thanks, Scott. So was good. I love hearing it over and over again.
Good. Yeah, good. We're not boring you too much. It's good.
That's great. Take care.
Thank you.